Let me ask you something, and try to answer not with your voice, but with that deeper part of yourself that reacts before words even come. Have you ever watched someone pretend they control their own fate, while everything around them whispers the opposite? If you've seen that look, the stubborn confidence masking a shaking foundation, then you're already closer to understanding what happened in Sergipe in 1877 than most historians ever will. And before we step fully into this story, do me a small favor. Take one steady breath, not to calm down, but to open a door inside yourself, the kind that only swings when the truth is about to enter. Because today, I'm not just walking you through a piece of Brazilian history. I'm taking you into a room lit by a dying oil lamp, where a woman shuffled a deck of worn cards and realized, too late, that the future she'd been reading for others had finally turned its gaze on her. A land breathing drought and desperation. The year was 1877, a year remembered in the northeast of Brazil, as if the sun itself had declared war. Drought stretched across the land like a tightening rope. Fields cracked, wells surrendered. Families watched the sky not with hope, but with accusation. And in the middle of all this dryness, physical and spiritual, stood the Engenho Santa Amalia, a sugarcane plantation in Sergipe, where the heat felt like punishment and the silence of the enslaved population told a truth that the masters refused to hear. This wasn't the grand Rio de Janeiro of imperial balls. This wasn't the booming coffee empire of Sao Paulo. This was the Northeast, a place where old beliefs, African ancestry, European superstition, Catholic rituals, and indigenous spirituality all tangled into something raw, alive, and dangerous. And it was here that lived Marta de Ogum, the enslaved fortune-teller. She wasn't born with that name. Her mother had whispered another one into her ear when Marta still couldn't walk. But on the plantation, people rarely got to keep their first truths. What they were allowed to keep, however, were the things nobody else understood. And Marta carried something the masters didn't understand at all. She carried sight, not the kind that entertains, not the kind that reassures, but the kind that unsettles even the person who possesses it, the woman who saw too much. Marta was the kind of woman whose presence made even the most arrogant overseer blink twice. Her voice was low, almost gentle, but it carried a gravity that didn't belong to someone with chains around her wrists. Some people said her grandmother had been a priestess in a secret ritual house in Ouida, across the ocean. Others whispered that when Marta stared too long at someone, memories they had buried began to rise like smoke. No matter the rumor, one truth remained constant. People sought her, even when it was forbidden, even when it was dangerous, even when it meant stepping into the little mud-floor hut behind the sugarcane mill after nightfall, praying that no one saw them. Because life on the plantation twisted itself around fear, sickness, lost children, broken families, harsh punishments, and impossible choices. And in a world like that, sometimes the only thing people wanted was a sign that tomorrow wouldn't devour them the same way yesterday had. And Marta, tired, scarred, unbroken Marta, gave them that sign. Or at least she tried. But every time she sat before her deck of Baralho Cigano, her gypsy cards, its edges softened by fingers that had trembled through too many stories, Marta felt an uneasiness crawling across her skin. The cards were changing. They felt heavier. They resisted her touch, as if something in the future had grown impatient and wanted to drag her forward faster than she was ready to see. She didn't speak this fear out loud, not to the other enslaved women, not to the older men who sought her guidance, not to the children who watched her with wide, reverent eyes. But she felt it every time, and the world around her felt it too, a master fattened on fear. The plantation was ruled by Senor Alvaro Duarte, a man whose wealth was not measured in land, but in the number of lives he believed he could command into obedience. He was shorter than the legends people told about him, hair thinning, eyes sharp, but not with intelligence, sharp the way a starving animal's eyes are sharp, always alert, always suspicious, always searching for something to dominate. To outsiders, he pretended sophistication. To his wife, he performed tenderness. To the church, he donated money. To his neighbors, he bragged about discipline and order. But those who lived under him, those who woke before dawn to cut the cane, those who heard the sound of his boots approaching long before he entered a room, they knew what he really was. A man who believed cruelty was a form of structure. A man who believed pain was proof of hierarchy. A man terrified of losing control. And that's exactly why he hated Marta. Deeply, instinctively, superstitiously. Because he sensed, long before the tragedy began, that her existence threatened the illusion he had built around himself. She didn't bow low enough when he passed. Her eyes didn't flicker away quickly enough. She didn't tremble the way he expected. And worst of all, people listened to her. On a plantation, power wasn't just about who could punish. It was about who people whispered about at night. And Marta's name, whispered in the dark, made Alvaro's blood boil when the cards betrayed the silence. It was a suffocating night in late October when everything began to unravel. The air felt thick, almost metallic. The kind of night when even the cicadas stayed quiet, as if they sensed something coming. Marta sat alone in her hut, the oil lamp flickering unevenly beside her, shadows stretching across the clay walls like hands reaching out. She hadn't planned to read the cards that night. She didn't want to. Her dreams had been restless for weeks, filled with images she couldn't decipher. A shovel, a grave with no body, a pair of boots sinking into mud, a hand reaching up from the earth. But something, not a voice, not a thought, but a pressure, pushed her toward the deck. "Breathe," she whispered to herself. Her own command felt foreign, like someone else had spoken it through her. She drew the first card, the coffin. Her stomach tightened. She drew the second, the whip. Her breath caught in her throat. She drew the third, and the third made her hands begin to tremble, because no matter how she tried to deny it, she recognized the image immediately. The Lord, not a lord, not authority, not a man in power, but their Lord, her owner, Alvaro Duarte. And below the illustration, faint but unmistakable, the card had developed a crack across its face, as if under the pressure of a future too heavy for paper. Marta stared at the cards, her mouth dry, her mind racing. She had seen danger in the cards before. She had seen betrayal, sickness, deaths. But this was different. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a possibility. This was certainty. The cards were telling her that Alvaro Duarte, the untouchable master, the man who believed himself beyond consequence, was going to die. And worse than that, somehow, some way, she was involved. Her hands shook so violently that the lamp flame wobbled. She whispered to the empty room, "No, no, this can't be." But the cards did not change, and the future did not blink. The moment everything shifted, she gathered the cards quickly, almost desperately, stuffing them back into the worn cloth pouch. But just as she did, a gust of wind slammed against the hut door. It wasn't a storm. There were no clouds, no breeze all evening. The sudden wind hit the door as if something large had leaned its weight on it. For a moment, Marta froze. Then she murmured a prayer under her breath, an old Yoruba invocation her mother had taught her, one meant to protect the living from the dangerous curiosity of the dead. But the moment she stood to latch the door, she noticed something in the corner. The ground had shifted, a thin line in the earth, a shallow depression, like the beginning of a grave. Her grave. Her heart pounded. Her breath became uneven. And for the first time since she had been a child, Marta felt a terror she couldn't name. Because there was one truth she had avoided acknowledging her entire life. Sight was not a gift. Not always. Sometimes it was a sentence. And tonight, the sentence had begun. At sunrise, nothing looked differente, and yet everything felt wrong. The sky above Sergipe carried that pale, exhausted blue that appears after long months without rain. The kind of sky that refuses drama, refuses beauty, refuses even the chance of hope. It just hangs there, empty, indifferent. But Marta knew, even before she stepped outside, even before she touched the ground with her bare feet, she felt it. The world had shifted overnight, and the shift had carved her name into something she couldn't escape. She opened her hut door slowly. The light spilled in like a blade. Women carrying baskets paused mid-step. 2 young boys stopped sharpening machetes. An old man, Joao Velho, who never feared anyone, lowered his gaze when she looked his way. People sensed it. Not the specifics, not the cards, not the grave forming under her bed, but they sense a disturbance. Sometimes human intuition speaks louder than any oracle. Whispers spreading like smoke. Rumors on plantations moved the way wind moved through sugarcane. Fast, invisible, unstoppable. By mid-morning, the whispers had already formed a shape. Marta saw something. Marta's eyes changed last night. She spoke to no one. She didn't sleep. The spirits warned her. The cards spoke louder than usual. Fear mixed with reverence. Curiosity tangled with dread. But there was one whisper Marta feared above all others. The master must not find out. Because Alvaro Duarte hated anything he couldn't predict, anything that threatened his illusion of control. And spiritual matters, fortune tellers, rituals, divinations, were the kind of thing that made him unravel from the inside. He believed such things weakened people. Yet ironically, he was terrified of them, which meant that if he learned Marta had seen his death, the consequences would not be slow nor subtle, a warning wrapped in silence. By noon, Marta felt a presence at her back. She turned. It was Liana, a young enslaved woman she had practically raised. Her eyes were rimmed with fear. "Marta, don't go near the mill today," Liana whispered, her voice trembling. "Why?" "Because the Capataz woke before dawn. He said he dreamed of thunder but heard no storm. He's in a mood. He's watching everyone. And he asked if anyone had been seeking you at night." Marta swallowed hard. "Did anyone tell him?" Liana shook her head quickly. "No, but he knows something happened. The mill's overseer, Capataz Romeu, was a man who built his authority on the fragility of others. He enjoyed breaking spirits the way some men enjoyed chewing tobacco, slowly, methodically, spitting out whatever didn't please him. If Marta became a target, even before Alvaro discovered the prophecy, Romeu would act, violently, eagerly, because cruelty wasn't just tolerated on the plantation. It was currency. Marta tries to hide from her own fate. All afternoon, Marta kept her head low. She worked quietly among the sugarcane bundles. But every sound, boots on gravel, a door slamming, the snort of a horse, sent a bolt of fear through her spine. Because she couldn't stop thinking about the shallow mark she had seen in the dirt of her hut, the beginning of a grave, small, still forming, waiting, her grave. And she remembered the cards from the night before, the coffin, the whip, the Lord. No matter how hard she tried to push away the images, they kept resurfacing like bodies in deep water. A conversation no one was brave enough to have. As the sun began to fall, the enslaved community gathered near the communal well. They were exhausted. Dust clung to their skin. Their mouths were dry, but their eyes flickered toward Marta again and again. Finally, it was Joao Velho, the elder with a voice like gravel, who approached her. "Marta," he muttered without meeting her gaze, "word is spreading too fast. You need to pretend nothing happened." "Pretending won't change what I saw," she said quietly. "No," he admitted, "but it may keep you alive until you understand what it means." She hesitated. He lowered his voice. "You saw something about the master, didn't you?" She stiffened. "How do you?" "Because if it were about one of us, you have spoken already." Silence deepened between them. "Heavy, urgent. Marta," he continued, "prophecies involving white men never end quietly on plantations. I didn't choose this." "No one chooses the things that chase them," he replied. "But we choose whether we run alone." She exhaled shakily. His words felt like a doorway she didn't want to walk through, but she nodded because he was right. A truth this large could not be carried by one person. Not when that person had no freedom, no protection, no rights, and no margin for mistakes. The master's wife notices a shift, while the enslaved population whispered in shadows. Up in the big house, another pair of eyes had turned toward Marta. Dona Helena Duarte, the master's wife, a woman trapped by lace and corsets, and by something far heavier, her husband's temper. Helena noticed everything that disrupted routine. She had learned to, for survival. And that afternoon she noticed something small but significant. The housemaids avoided Marta's name. They flinched at any mention of last night. They crossed themselves more often. Helena wasn't foolish. She knew the enslaved community held on to their own beliefs, their own sacred practices, their own ways of interpreting danger. And she knew this. When fear spreads among them, it's never without reason. She approached Carolina, a maid she trusted. "Something is wrong," Helena said softly. "Tell me." Carolina froze. Her hands shook around the linens she was folding. "I don't know, Senora." "You're lying," Helena whispered, not with anger, with worry. "Is someone sick? Is something coming?" Carolina hesitated, and in that hesitation, Helena's heartbeat changed, because she suddenly realized the fear wasn't about them, the enslaved workers. It was about her household, about her husband, about something approaching that she had no power to stop. The overseer sees the cracks. By nightfall, Capataz Romeo's eyes were everywhere. Suspicion rotted inside him like spoiled fruit. He noticed Marta's unease. He noticed the subtle way others stepped between him and her. He noticed the wary tension in the air. And Romeo loved nothing more than a threat he could crush. He approached Marta near the feeding troughs, where lantern light cast sharp shadows across her face. "What happened?" he asked her bluntly. "Nothing, senor." "Don't lie to me," he snapped. "Someone saw your hut lit late. You were reading cards again, weren't you?" Her stomach tightened. "You know that is forbidden," he continued. "Unless, of course, you saw something you shouldn't have seen." His words stretched into the air like a noose. Marta felt her breath slipping, her palms sweating, her throat drying. He leaned closer. "If you're hiding something, I'll find out. And when I do, not even God will stand between you and punishment." Then he walked away, boots scraping the dirt, his silhouette devoured by darkness. She stood there trembling, not from fear of Romeo himself, but because she sensed a narrative tightening around her. She was becoming the center of a storm she didn't summon. Night falls and the vision returns. That night, Marta tried to sleep. She lay on her straw mat, staring at the cracked ceiling. But the moment she closed her eyes, the images flooded back. A man's boots sinking into mud, a grave half-dug, her own hands trembling against cold soil, a voice, neither human nor spirit, whispering a single sentence: "You will walk beside death, or you will lie in his place." She jolted awake, drenched in sweat. And that's when she heard it. Soft footsteps outside her hut. Slow, measured, intentional. She rose quietly, approached the door, peered to the tiny gap in the wood. What she saw made her blood run cold. Senor Alvaro Duarte himself stood outside, staring directly at her hut door, silent, expression unreadable, hands behind his back, as if he knew, as if someone or something had told him. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He simply watched. For a long, suffocating minute. Then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Marta's knees nearly gave out, because in his eyes, in the quiet fury burning beneath his calm mask, she recognized the truth he already suspected. He didn't know the details yet, but he sensed a betrayal shaped like prophecy. And men like Alvaro didn't wait for answers. They manufactured them with blood, fear, and punishment. The grave deepens. The next morning, before anyone else woke, Marta checked the corner of her hut. The ground had shifted again. Deeper, wider, clearer. No longer the beginning of a grave. Now unmistakably a grave in progress. A grave meant for one person only. She pressed her hand against her mouth to keep from crying out, because now she knew. The prophecy wasn't just about the master's death. It was also about her own. And fate, cruel, inevitable fate, had tightened its fingers around both of their throats. There are moments in history when everything tilts, not gradually, not gracefully, but violently, as if the world itself loses balance for a second. The plantation reached that moment 3 days after Marta's vision, and everyone felt the shift before they understood it. A morning that refused to behave normally. The bell that usually rang before dawn didn't ring. The sound of hooves, normally the master's prideful morning routine, never echoed across the courtyard. and the kitchen, which always smelled of boiled corn and smoke, stood strangely silent. Silence on a plantation is never neutral. It's a warning wearing the disguise of calm. Marta stepped outside her hut, heart tight with dread. The air felt colder than usual, as if the sun hesitated to rise. A dog barked once, sharply, then stopped abruptly. Then came the footsteps. Heavy, urgent, multiple. Workers began gathering near the big house, some out of duty, others out of fear, and many out of the instinct that told them something irreversible had already occurred. Marta stayed near the back of the crowd. Her hands trembled so hard she had to hold her wrists to steady them. And then Romeo, the overseer, emerged on the porch, his face pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting everywhere but at the people. Behind him stood Dona Helena, the master's wife, her white nightgown fluttering the breeze, her mouth slightly open, her expression stuck between shock and disbelief. It was Dona Helena who finally spoke. Her voice cracked. "Senor Alvaro is dead." A ripple moved through the crowd, fear, relief, confusion, terror all tangled together. Marta's knees weakened, not because she was surprised, but because the prophecy had stepped out of the cards and into the dirt of the real world. How the master was found. Romeo took over the explanation, his voice monotone, almost mechanical, as if he feared that if he let emotion slip through, the truth would consume him. "He was found near the edge of the cane fields," he said. "Face down. The horse returned without him. We believe he fell." But Marta knew a fall doesn't silence a man like Alvaro Duarte. Someone in the crowd whispered, "A fall doesn't bruise a man's throat like that." Another murmured, "He looked strangled." But then 3 armed guards stepped forward, glaring, and the whispers evaporated like mist burned by the sun. Romeo raised a hand. "There will be an investigation. Until then, no one leaves this plantation. No one." His eyes landed on Marta for a fraction of a second. Sharp, suspicious, threatening. And in that look, she understood. He thinks I knew. He thinks I hid something. He thinks I might have been involved. An involvement, real or imagined, was enough to justify torture, execution, or disappearance. The rumor that became a weapon. By midday, rumors were spreading like wildfire. Some claimed the horse returned panicked, its saddle torn. Others swore they heard shouting in the cane fields before dawn. A few whispered of footprints. 2 sets, not one, near the place where the body was found. But the most dangerous rumor of all? Marta predicted this. No one said it loudly. No one dared. But whispers don't need volume to cause damage. They only need direction. And the rumor began pointing straight at Marta. Children avoided her. Adults glanced at her with fear that bordered on reverence. Even Liana, her closest friend, looked at her differently, as if unsure whether to approach or pray from a distance. And quietly, invisibly, something else was forming. Suspicion among the white overseers. Because if Marta had truly foreseen the master's death, then she might have influenced it. Or worse, she might have helped someone plan it. Helena seeks the truth. Late that afternoon, Marta was summoned to the big house. Not by Romeo, not by the guards, by Dona Helena. The plantation's mistress waited inside the small salon, her hands twisting a rosary until the chain nearly snapped. She looked exhausted, terrified, and strangely determined. "Marta," she began, voice small but steady, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly." Marta bowed her head. "Yes, Senora." "Did my husband talk to you recently? Did he ask about his health, his future, anything of that nature?" Marta froze. She knew the danger of every possible answer. "No, Senora," she said softly. "We did not speak." Helena inhaled shakily. "I see." She paused, studying Marta's face with unsettling intensity. "I know the others, they trust you. They go to you for guidance. I don't condemn them for that. But Marta, if there is something you know, anything, you must tell me now. Not as your mistress. As a woman who is afraid." Her voice broke. Marta wanted to tell her the truth. That the cards had shown Alvaro's death. That the grave had been forming in her hut. That she herself felt fate wrapping around her neck. But she couldn't. Not in that moment. Not when every word she spoke could be twisted, used, weaponized. "I'm truly sorry for your loss," Marta whispered, "but I know nothing more than anyone else." Helena nodded slowly, though her eyes showed she didn't fully believe it. "You may go," she said quietly. But as Marta turned to leave, Helena added one last sentence, one that clung to her skin like cold breath. "Be careful, Marta. Romeo is looking for someone to blame." Romeo's hunt begins. By nightfall, torches were lit across the plantation. Guards searched the cane fields. They questioned workers. They demanded alibis, an absurd concept in a place where no one controlled their own time. Romeo led the hunt with a kind of feverish enthusiasm, convinced the master's death could be turned into an opportunity to assert dominance over every soul on the property. At one point, he shoved an elderly man against a wall, screaming. Someone helped him die. Someone struck him, and I will find that person. But Marta knew the truth he refused to acknowledge. He wasn't searching for a killer. He was searching for a story that made sense to him, a story where power stayed intact. And she was slowly becoming the lead character in the version he wanted to tell. The revelation in the cane fields. That night, Marta felt pulled back to the place where Alvaro's body had been found. It wasn't courage. It wasn't foolishness. It was the same force that had pulled her to the cards days earlier, a sensation that something unfinished demanded her presence. She waited until the guards moved farther down the fields. Then she slipped into the tall cane, guided only by moonlight. The ground was disturbed. Boot prints, broken stalks, signs of struggle. But something else caught her eye, something the guards, in their frenzy, had missed. A strip of cloth, white, torn, caught on a jagged piece of wood. It wasn't Alvaro's. He never wore white in the early mornings. It was from a dress, a woman's dress. Marta felt a chill slide down her spine. The prophecy had not shown her a woman. It had shown only the coffin, the whip, and the Lord. But perhaps the prophecy had never been about the killer. Perhaps it was about the consequences. And before she could analyze further, she heard footsteps, fast, approaching. She ducked behind the cane. 2 guards passed by, whispering. Romeo says the fortune teller knew beforehand. If she knew she's involved, he says she'll confess one way or another. Her breath caught. They continued. And Helena, she won't speak. Romeo thinks she knows more, but he can't touch her. Helena knew something, hidden something, protected someone. The ground beneath Marta seemed to shift. The strip of cloth, Helena's pale nightgown, her fear that morning. A horrifying possibility crept into Marta's mind. Did Helena play a role in her husband's death? Not directly, perhaps, but in desperation, in fear and self-defense. Women married to cruel men sometimes saw only one escape. And if Helena suspected Marta had foreseen it, she might try to redirect suspicion to the woman who had already been marked by fate. When the pieces turned against her, on her way back to her hut, Marta felt watched by guards, by Romeo, by the spirits she had spent her whole life interpreting, and worst of all, by destiny itself, tightening like a tightening rope. When she entered her hut, she froze. The grave in the corner had deepened again. Someone or something had been digging while she was away. The message was no longer symbolic. It was a deadline. She fell to her knees, hands shaking violently, tears running down her face. "Please," she whispered hoarsely, "please tell me what I'm supposed to do." But the room remained silent. The cards refused to glow. The spirits refused to speak. And the earth answered only with the shape of her future. A grave, almost ready. The decision forced upon her. At dawn the next day, Romeo sent for her. Not politely, not formally. 2 guards dragged her from her hut and brought her to the courtyard, where Romeo waited with a rope in his hands. The entire enslaved community watched, paralyzed. "Marta," he said, voice brimming with triumph, "you'll explain how you knew the master would die." "I didn't." He struck her across the face. "Don't lie. I didn't kill him." "I didn't say you did," he hissed. "But you knew, and that makes you guilty." Her mouth tasted of blood. Guilty of what? She whispered. Guilty of sorcery. Guilty of conspiracy. Guilty of turning the slaves against their rightful master. The crowd murmured. Fear, shock, pain. Romeo raised a rope. You will confess before sunset. Her heart pounded, because she knew this was the moment the prophecy had been leading to, the moment where she had to choose. Die silent, or speak a truth that could burn the entire plantation to ground. There is a particular silence that fills the air just before injustice is carried out. It's not peaceful. It's not empty. It's the silence of witnesses who know they cannot intervene. That was a silence that wrapped itself around the courtyard as Capataz Romeo tightened the rope between his hands. Marta stood in the center, blood drying on her lip, dust clinging to her skin, but her posture, despite everything, refused to break. Her fear was real. Her trembling was real, but so was her resolve. Romeo mistook that resolve for defiance. You will talk, he said through clenched teeth, or your grave will be ready before nightfall. For a moment, Marta considered staying silent, letting fate roll over her like a tidal wave, letting destiny take its course without struggle. But then she looked around. She saw Liana with tears on her cheeks. She saw João Velho gripping his cane so tightly his knuckles had gone pale. She saw children staring with wide, frightened eyes. If she stayed silent, the story of her death would belong to Romeo. The spirits would be blamed. The enslaved community would suffer, and the truth, whatever the truth truly was, would be buried with her. She couldn't let that happen. Not after everything she had seen. Not after the cards had chosen her. Not after the earth itself had carved a grave in her name. The interrogation begins. Romeo paced before her like a wolf testing prey. Did you poison the master? No. Did you arrange a meeting with someone in the cane fields? No. Did you use your witchcraft to harm him? You know I cannot harm anyone. Lies, he roared, stepping toward her. But she did not step back. She lifted her chin, even as a boot print stained her dress. I read what was already written, she whispered. I did not create it. Romeo grabbed her by the hair and yanked her head back. You knew he would die, he spat into her face. And that makes you guilty. Marta forced her voice past the pain. Knowing and doing are not the same thing. Romeo's fist tightened. He wanted an enemy he could break. He wanted a confession that restored his authority. He wanted the world to make sense again. Because without the master, Romeo's own position suddenly felt fragile. And fragile men cling hardest to cruelty. A voice from the house. Marta must speak, said a soft voice from the edge of the courtyard. Everyone turned. Dona Helena stood there, her hair unpinned, her dress wrinkled, her face pale. Romeo stiffened. He bowed his head slightly. Senora, he said, this is plantation business. I will handle. No, she interrupted. You won't. The courtyard fell into stunned silence. Helena approached slowly, her eyes fixed on Marta, not with hatred, not with blame, with something much more complicated. Marta, she said quietly, tell me the truth. Did you see his death coming? The question was a dagger wrapped in silk. If Marta said yes, she was guilty. If she said no, Helena would know she was lying. Marta swallowed hard. A command rose inside her, one she didn't expect, one she didn't fully understand. Speak as if this is the last truth you will ever say. She breathed in. I saw danger, she said softly. I saw death. I saw the master fall. But I did not see the hands that pushed him. Romeo scoffed. Convenient. But Helena flinched. A tiny, almost imperceptible flinch. And in that movement, Marta found something she didn't expect. Confirmation. There were hands. Hands other than Alvaro's. But Helena was not ready to admit it. Not publicly. Not yet. The strip of cloth becomes a blade. Marta reached into her pocket, slowly, deliberately, and held up the strip of white cloth she had found in the cane fields. I found this near where he died, she said. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Helena's eyes widened in terror. Her breath hitched audibly. Romeo snatched the cloth from Marta's hand. "This proves nothing," he barked. But Marta wasn't speaking to him. She was speaking to Helena. Someone was there with him, Marta said gently. Someone wearing white. Helena's throat tightened. Her eyes glistened. And Marta saw the truth settle behind them. Not guilt, not cruelty. Fear. Absolute, paralyzing fear. Because sometimes a woman married to a violent man becomes a prisoner, wearing silk. And sometimes a moment of desperation becomes the only moment where she tastes freedom. Perhaps Alvaro had fallen. Perhaps he had been pushed. Perhaps he had reached for Helena and she had stepped away. The specifics no longer mattered. Only the truth remained. Helena had been near her husband's death, and she could not allow the plantation to know. Helena turns a blade. Helena wiped her tears quickly, regaining composure with breath that seemed to cost her everything. "Romeo is right," she said, voice trembling but firm. "That cloth proves nothing." Romeo straightened proudly. But before he could speak, Helena continued. "The only thing we know for certain is that Marta has been spreading fear with her visions." Marta stared at her, a quiet betrayal, a soft, elegant cruelty from someone who had almost asked for salvation moments earlier. Helena wasn't choosing Romeo. She wasn't choosing justice. She was choosing survival. And to survive, she needed a sacrifice. "Marta," Helena said, her voice hardening, "you will no longer read cards on this plantation. You will no longer gather people at night. You will no longer speak of omens or deaths. If you disobey, Romeo will punish you as he sees fit." Marta exhaled shakily. The sentence was not a death sentence, but it was a silencing, a burial of her identity, a stripping of her last autonomy. Romeo, however, wanted more. "Senora, we should still punish her." "No," Helena said sharply. "The Empire will send investigators soon. We cannot appear barbaric." Romeo clenched his jaw, but obeyed. Marta was released. Not forgiven. Not believed. Not freed. Just postponed. A night alone with the spirits. That night, Marta returned to her hut. The grave in the corner remained. Deep, perfectly shaped. Waiting. She knelt beside it, tears dropping into the loosened earth. "Is this my end?" she whispered to the darkness. "To be buried before my truth is heard?" The air shifted. A coldness danced along her spine. Not threatening, not hostile, present. For the first time since the prophecy began, Marta felt accompanied, as if the spirits finally chose to reveal themselves. A whisper, soft as breath, old as earth, rose around her. "Fate does not bury you when you speak. It buries you when you stop." She closed her eyes. For the first time, she understood the grave wasn't a warning. It was a choice. Die silently, or live loudly. She wiped her tears and stood. The aftermath that became legend. When the Imperial investigators arrived weeks later, they found Alvaro's death inconclusive. An accident, they said. Privately, some suspected more. But the Empire was never eager to expose crimes within its own elite. Marta was never punished further. But she was watched, silenced, her cards confiscated, her gatherings broken apart. Still, people sought her, quietly, secretly, with fear and hope tangled together. Because truth, real truth, does not disappear just because someone fears it. Over time, stories about Marta grew. Some said she dug her own grave every week, filling it again each morning to remind herself that destiny only wins when we surrender to it. Others claimed she refused to die until she had guided every enslaved child on the plantation into freedom, physical or spiritual. One legend said that on the night slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888, Marta stood beside the old grave in her hut and whispered, "I saw this coming too." And then she smiled for the first time in decades. The earth that once threatened to swallow her had become her witness instead, the reflection that remains for us. So let me ask you something now. You stayed with this story until the last breath. How many times in your own life have you been punished? Not for what you did, but for what you knew? How many times have you felt fate digging a quiet grave in the corner of your days, whispering that silence might keep you safe, but truth might keep you whole. Marta wasn't killed, but she was buried in another way, buried in expectation, in fear, in a system designed to choke voices like hers. And yet, she spoke anyway, even when words became danger, even when her truth had sharp edges. She spoke, and for that reason alone, her story refuses to die, because in every era, in every country, in every quiet corner of the world, there is someone like Marta, someone who sees too much, someone who feels what others try to ignore, someone who digs their own grave not to die, but to remind themselves that destiny is a negotiation, not a sentence. And if you remember nothing else from this story, remember this final truth. Fate only wins when the living stop speaking.